later, but we're going to have Wayne Madsen with us for the balance of the hour. We're going to be discussing with Wayne Madsen his background, not just with the NSA, but his expertise in naval warfare, particularly in tracking Russian and Chinese subs. That was his job as a naval officer before he worked in high-level security inside the National Security Agency. So he was actually one of the head directors of groups that did internal investigations at the NSA. He's also written for the Village Voice, Counterpunch, the Miami Herald, Houston Chronicle, Philadelphia Inquirer, amongst others. He's also a best-selling author, and he's reported on hundreds of national security stories at Congress and at the National Press Club. Frequent guest here, WayneMadsenReport.com. And he now is an official correspondent. As we've been telling you, you see his articles almost daily, 5-6 days a week at Infowars.com. And he's going to be on little secret missions. A lot of times you'll hear about where he's gone after he's been there. Outside the U.S., inside the U.S. He's going to be covering the RNC, the DNC. So we're getting that lined up to get him his credentials this year. I also, of course, will be traveling to those and covering them as well as some of our other reporters. So Wayne Madsen now here, part of the InfoWars operation. The first story he wanted to go on the ground with was one he's already gone out a few years ago and investigated, the very mysterious death of a CIA contractor pilot who was admittedly worked with the CIA, who was writing a book about 9/11 being an inside job, and then he supposedly killed himself after he killed his family. He went and talked to neighbors and more, and they said it was very suspicious. He's going to recap all that, but his investigation of the person that was executed tied to the famous aircraft, both public and private, governmental and private aviation base that also runs some strange clandestine connected airlines out of it today. So Wayne went back out there with one of our camera people and investigated, I guess, for 4 days. So now they've returned. Next week, we'll have the full report from on the ground. But obviously, this stuff's so dangerous, we want to go ahead and get the intel out now for that report next week. Wayne Madsen joining us via Skype. I think it's important you recap from your research what you believe happened on 9/11. We know, obviously, the official story isn't true. We're not saying the whole government was involved. It was multinationals and operatives, obviously, inside. The stewardesses reported on airphones and real calls, gas, smoke, they couldn't breathe. Clearly, these planes were fitted with remote control systems. We know that. So there's a lot of pieces here. And then I want to get into the background on this and your findings. These are pretty bombshell. This is part one of several articles you're going to be writing up on Infowars.com. 9/11 CIA likely built remote-controlled commercial jets in aircraft boneyard. This would explain how 9/11 hijackers were able to fly commercial jets with little experience. That report is up on Infowars.com. Wayne Madsen.
Yes, Alex. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for providing the logistics support to kind of track down what Phil Marshall was after. In 2012, Phil Marshall, the late Eastern and United pilot who had 15,000 hours in the cockpits flying for United, specifically the Boeing 757 and 767, the two aircraft allegedly we're told were involved in the 9/11 attack. Phil Marshall had been to the Pinal Air Park, which is right between Phoenix and Tucson, but closer actually to Tucson. It's the old boneyard. It's been around for decades, probably, I would say, 6 decades or so. It was an Army airfield training base in World War II, and then it was leased back by the Pinal County back to the CIA, who has been there with all kinds of different front companies. One of the biggest ones being Evergreen Aviation. And it was when Evergreen had that particular airfield that Phil Marshall went from California down there based on a tip he received from some old friends when he used to fly for one, Barry Seal, the DEA informant that was assassinated gangland execution style in Baton Rouge in 1986. These old colleagues tipped them off and said, Phil, you know, we know you're writing yet a third book on 9/11. You know, your answers are down here at the Pinal Air Park. So he went down there. The situation at the time was that airfield was still controlled by Evergreen. There was still guards at the main gate, armed guards at the main gate. But earlier this year, the final sale of the airfield was made from Evergreen to a company called Marana Aerospace Solutions. And Marana Aerospace Solutions is actually owned by another company called Relativity LLC on North Fort Myer Drive in Roslyn and Arlington, Virginia. Now, we have one individual who is a principal of Relativity, which is really the owner of Marana Aerospace Solutions, one Leslie Armitage, who also happens to be a co-founder of the Carlyle Group Europe. Okay, so we have the Bush family involved with the Carlyle Group. The Bin Laden family were investors in the Carlyle Group. Frank Carlucci, the former CIA guy, is the chairman emeritus of the Carlyle Group. And so it was really incumbent to get down to this facility, since for about, I'd say, 9 months, the security has been dropped at the main gate, which allowed us, myself and the InfoWars cameraman, to proceed onto the base. And we were actually also able to get a tour in the restricted area by one of the county officials responsible for this facility, which was kind of, we really lucked out on that one, because
this is unprecedented. For those that don't know, this has been very restricted for a long time, so you use this open window to get in. And of course, the investigative journalist that died had been connected into the government as well. We'll talk about some of his past and why they were so scared of him. Folks, this is very dangerous, and of course Wayne won't say that himself, but I'm going to get him to talk about it. This is not a safe report for us to be doing, for us to be engaged in. And I'm not bragging. I'm just saying that this is not a game. Just understand, this is very important. Stay with us. Wayne Madsen, investigative journalist with Infowars.com, joins us. He has just returned from spending 4 days out in Arizona at the famous, highly secretive boneyard that is admittedly run by the CIA. Now it's been handed over to the Carlyle Group, who is at the very top of the pyramid when it comes to the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned us of. And the connections of the Carlyle Group to 9/11 are staggering. They were even in the London Guardian and Associated Press that the Bushes were at the main table, former President Bush, with the head of the Bin Laden family when 9/11 happened in Langley, Virginia. Now, Carlyle Group Subcompany runs the boneyard that the investigative journalist was investigating when he was killed. So, Wayne, this is a 6-minute segment, long segment coming up. Then we'll shift gears with your naval background into the Russian subs supposedly on the East Coast cable, underwater cable, the situation with the Spratly Islands, the Chinese. I mean, with your NSA and naval background in naval warfare and anti-submarine warfare activity, you're perfect to be able to speak to this. But let's continue now, getting back into why this is such a big deal, what your findings are, the report coming up next week. But to have the Carlyle Group in the middle of this and using a front company, this just sends up more alarm bells.
Well, right. And Phil Marshall, the late Phil Marshall, who according to the Calaveras County, California sheriff, is said to have on sometime around the evening of January 31st, 2013, he's said to have taken his Glock, killed his teenage son, his teenage daughter, the family dog, and then turned the weapon on himself. He was writing a third book about 9/11, and he apparently was tipped off about something having to do with Canal Air Park. Now, this came to me by a relative of his at his funeral, which I attended in Mandeville, Louisiana, and also from an FBI agent. So, you know, you can't go wrong with those kinds of tips. The issue was that up until earlier this year, as I said, you couldn't even get anywhere near this facility. You could see it from the fence line, but that's as far as you would be able to go. You couldn't get through the gate, so we were able to do that. Now, Phil Marshall, the hard disk that had his manuscript on it for his third book has disappeared. Last we knew, it was in the hands of the Department of Justice in Sacramento in the crime lab. Nobody knows what's happened to it, but it's quite clear whatever Marshall got was along the lines of what we picked up in Pinal this past week, because it's very, very clear that Pinal not only takes planes in for storage, it takes planes in for quick maintenance, it takes planes in to have their parts cannibalized, and then they're sent to scrap. They take planes in, put in storage, then they're put back in maintenance and returned to full service. Yet another feature of this particular facility is that they can fabricate parts for airplanes there, brand new parts. And I asked the question, as everybody may be aware of what a drop gun is. You take different parts from a gun, you put a new gun together, and it's untraceable. Well, no pun intended, but the same thing can be done with aircraft at Pinal Airport, so we could maybe call them drop planes.
And in operation, start over with your drop planes point, because that's important after the break, but I just want to add the bombshell. For those that don't know, Operation Northwoods, Kennedy said no to the plan. Eisenhower said no to the plan right before he left office as well. That's why he gave the famous speech warning of a military takeover with corporate interest, that they would create fake aircraft built basically out of parts, put a tail number on it, launch CIA people under fake names to have that plane land safely, or blow that plane up and then have the other plane go to another location to make it look like the Soviets had actually blown up a plane on behalf of the Cubans. They were also going to bomb sports stadiums, malls, shoot up military bases to blame the Soviets and basically start World War III. That's even ABC News. So we're going to break. But when you talk about a drop plane, we know that they had aircrafts, another Flight 93 that landed at an air base, at a NASA base. We know a whole bunch of weirdness went on, and the official story of 9/11 is fake. And we know there was all sorts of weird stuff on the bottoms of two of the planes. They didn't fit as passenger liners. So we're trying to cobble together exactly what happened, and it ties back to this CIA-run base. We just sent reporters there. Wayne Madsen is our guest, and we're just doing a data dump here live on air before the special report comes out last week, because it's dangerous to sit on information like we're sitting on. I have interviewed two guests that Wayne Madsen helped me get on that ended up dying. One of them, of course, the D.C. Madam. And I mean months after she was on. I have interviewed people involved in 9/11 like Barry Jennings, and he's dead 2 weeks after he's on, Deputy Head of Emergency Management, detailing bombs in Building 7. I'm not trying to get killed. I've got a duty to fight these people. Our country's been hijacked by criminals. Our government, as you know, on the one-year anniversary of Obama saying there's a red line in Syria, if Assad uses chemical weapons, we will invade you. On the one-year anniversary of that, when they had the U.S. forces ready to invade in the air bombardment, Al-Qaeda launched 2 different chemical attacks. It later even came out at the UN and mainstream news that indeed Al-Qaeda launched the attacks. Because Al-Qaeda isn't completely controlled by the West, it's a wind-up toy. And they shot videos to be rock stars. That's what they do. College, people want to get touchdowns to get girls. Al-Qaeda chops Christians' heads off, rapes women, and blows up churches and launches chemical attacks. And, of course, it came out it was Saudi Arabian nerve gas. It was identified. Now they flooded Europe with all these jihadis. We don't know exactly what happened on 9/11, but we know that it's not the official story we've been told and we've seen. So, Wayne, I want you to get into what you, from your research, really believe happened on 9/11, but also, as you said, the data dump on this. But I interrupted you with the break coming up when you were making the point that this is a drop plane. Well, we know in Operation Northwoods they talk about having 2 aircraft, one that they fly up, that they blow up, the other that they actually take off with CIA personnel on board with John Doe, Jane Doe names to have those people's names in the news. The FBI, to its credit, as you know, came out 2 years after 9/11 and said, we went and looked at these so-called calls. None of them were real. The Solicitor General's wife did not call him, as he said on CNN. The only two calls were